Think the Renaissance was just about art, poetry, and men in tights painting ceilings. Think again. Behind the marble statues and Latin verses was a world dripping in lust, power, and blood-soaked ambition. These weren't just dukes and cardinals, they were seducers, poisoners, and masters of manipulation. Because in these halls of gold and shadow, sex was power, God was politics, and love. Well, love was just another weapon, hiding daggers behind silk gloves and secrets behind every smile. This isn't the story you read in history class. This is the story they didn't dare teach youth, the one where nuns had lovers, popes had armies, and noblewomen pulled the strings of entire kingdoms from behind lace fans and velvet veils. You'll find no saints here, only sinners who knew how to make sin look divine. So forget everything you thought you knew about the so-called Age of Enlightenment. Welcome to the Renaissance. It's going to get dark and dangerously delicious. Florence, 1487. The city shimmered with candlelight and the scent of burning myrrh, its marble halls echoing with lute melodies and whispered conspiracies. Beneath the surface of artistry and scholarship, Florence was a chessboard, was both a test of heart and flesh. A silver-plated iron cage, crafted like a split dome and divided by a web-thin mesh of metal, was placed in a ceremonial chamber within the Palazzo Medici. Her voice as soft as morning mist, but edged with flint. I've heard this cage once caused a noble pair to call off their engagement. Do you believe in such trials? For 3 days and 3 nights, meals were delivered through a narrow slit, and attendants from both families took turns watching from behind a thick curtain. No one was allowed to interfere. In every subtle smile or gentle flick of her wrist, the flicker of flame cast strange shadows through the cage's latticework, dancing across their faces. I once desired something that didn't belong to me, he said, and now? But in that moment, his gaze fell to Bianca's slender hand. Her fingers gently pressed against a tiny iron joint in the cage. She was doing something, but her face remained serene, almost idle, sitting opposite someone you can't touch. What do you desire most? That's the closest I've ever come. Sometimes, she whispered, what we can't touch is easiest to take. If the other person lets their guard down, their breathing was the only sound. She chipped away at the invisible barrier of control around him. The first hours passed in silence, until Bianca began to ask questions. Sometimes playful, sometimes piercing. She inquired about Lorenzo's military campaigns in Naples, his views on Plato, his favorite lines of Petrarch, and whether loyalty was a virtue or a trap. He seated himself on the violet silk chair embroidered with silver thread, his hands resting calmly on his knees, his eyes locked onto the mesh of iron between them. I believe in whatever forces people to reveal their nature, he said. Whether through silence or speech, the bride and groom would be bound to one another, locked inside 2 opposing halves of the cage. Silver candelabras inlaid with emeralds, and frescoes depicting Greek gods seducing mortals under divine enchantments. But it was the iron cage that dominated the space, like some artifact from a fallen angel, exquisitely beautiful, but inherently unnatural, close enough to hear each other's breath and heartbeat, yet forever denied the warmth of a touch. And every night was another move in a grand political game. The House of Medici, with its endless vaults of gold and fingers reaching as far as the papacy, Bianca asked, not looking away, was seeking to cement its power through a marriage alliance with the rival Dreg family, a noble lineage with ancestral control over key southern territories in Tuscany. It would have been a typical power marriage, if not for a strange and ancient ritual, Il Carcere d'Amore, the prison of love. This archaic custom, said to originate from Sina's forgotten rites. On the first night, Duke Lorenzo de' Medici stepped into the room. He was 29, tall and broad-shouldered, his face carved from Florentine marble, and his dark eyes glinting with the quiet menace of a man raised on power and survival. Born into a world where emotion was weakness, Lorenzo had learned to wear refinement like a mask. Elegant, unreadable. His bride-to-be, Bianca d'Arigi, was 17. Her skin was the color of porcelain from Phoenix. Her lips, the shade of dark wine, and her hair coiled tightly beneath a black-laced veil. She entered the opposite side of the cage with the grace of a court-trained noble woman, but her eyes, steel-gray and sharp, scanned Lorenzo not with innocence, but with calculation. She had grown up at the foot of her father's war councils and knew how to read an opponent's move before it was made. Duke Lorenzo, she spoke. Lorenzo did not answer right away. The chamber surrounding them was decadently adorned, Persian rugs. Time moved slowly. Lorenzo, ever measured, answered her with cautious precision. But he soon realized, Bianca was not a pawn on the board. She was a player. As night fell, only 2 flickering candles lit the chamber. Have you ever been in love? Lorenzo turned to her. Slowly. Bianca tilted her head slightly. The air seemed to thicken. Lorenzo didn't reply. He said nothing. Bianca smiled faintly. Her words, coupled with the faintest metallic click, were the first signs of the true game beginning. The second day dawned with the solemn toll of cathedral bells in the distance. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns onto the iron cage that still held Duke Lorenzo and Lady Bianca in its cold embrace. Rumors had begun to spread. The Duke and the girl do not quarrel, nor do they speak much. Perhaps they are both too clever to fall prey to each other. Her fingers, delicate yet determined, had traced the seams of the cage's mesh, testing the joints. The cage was not merely ceremonial. It had been constructed with obsessive care. Each wire was silver-coated, each node riveted. But Bianca knew craftsmanship. She had watched blacksmiths in her father's court forge armor and weapons, and she knew where even the strongest metal bent. The room was quiet, as if holding its breath for what might come next. Servants had left breakfast, poached figs with honey and toasted bread, and departed silently. No attendants lingered behind the velvet curtains this time, but Bianca had not spent the night idle. Lorenzo watched her with narrowed eyes, not suspicious, but intrigued, like a man studying a riddle he couldn't yet solve. She had waited until Lorenzo closed his eyes, pretending to sleep. A song from my nurse about a girl who dreamed of escaping through a keyhole. Then Bianca's voice dropped, low and steady. Now, in the full light of day, Bianca sat cross-legged in her half of the cage, humming a melody barely audible. Her fingers, while playing idly with her hair, moved down to the base of one of the cage's supports. A rivet, because I smile, and everyone thinks I'm harmless, until they see the web too late, small and rusted, disguised beneath a strip of lace she had pulled from her sleeve. A spider can trap, but it can also be crushed. She was using it as a makeshift shim, prying gently. "You sing?" he finally said. "That's new." The rivet slipped, just slightly, enough to loosen one seam in the mesh, not fully, but enough that, with a bit more work, she could slide through, not out of the cage entirely, but into his half. Bianca smiled, unfazed. Did she succeed? But if this marriage is to survive beyond spectacle, it must be built on something other than tricks and seduction. Her charm, retreating like a wave, pulling from the shore. If you were caught tampering with this cage, your family would accuse you of subverting the ritual. The door to the chamber burst open. A court official entered, red-faced, stammering, breaking faith. There's a difference. They might even say, sorcery. She became the keyhole. Bianca replied, her voice layered with mystery. Lorenzo said nothing, but he was watching her hands again. Bianca wasn't hiding her work now. Lorenzo leaned forward. Bianca paused. You sound afraid? I did not desecrate anything. The point is, obedience, submission, trust. Lady Bianca is bold, calculating, and intelligent. These are not crimes. Not in my court. Their eyes locked. No flirtation, now only tension, like a drawn bow. Not manipulation. I merely tested a boundary. That is the point of the ritual. Is it not? I sound cautious. There was a beat of silence. Bianca's aunt entered, her face pale with fury. I need to know. Will you always test the cage? Everyone knew it was no longer strong enough to hold her. Do you know what they call me in Mantua? She asked. Lorenzo shook his head. The spider of summer? She picked up a fig from the breakfast tray and bit into it. Check the cage. Lorenzo stepped back, arms folded. Bianca remained still, as I and she has tampered with it. This is sabotage. This girl, this niece of mine, has desecrated the ritual. This alliance is a farce. It was not a boast. It was a warning. Lorenzo smiled faintly. Bianca looked directly into his eyes. Only if you see it. Another faint click echoed through the cage. She wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to cross over. But Lorenzo rose abruptly from his seat. Enough, he said, voice cutting the air like a blade. Bianca froze. For a long moment, neither moved. You've made your point, Lorenzo said. You're clever. You're bold. You've played your game. Bianca's expression hardened. You speak of survival, but I speak of power, she said. You want peace between our families? I want control of mine. Before Lorenzo could respond, my Lord Duke, Lady Bianca, forgive the intrusion, but we have a situation. Behind him, 2 armed guards and Lady Vittoria d'Araghi. She pointed at the cage. The guards moved forward. One guard knelt and examined the rivet. His face paled. It's been loosened, he confirmed. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Vittoria turned to the court official. Bianca stood now, unshaken. No, Vittoria snapped. Lorenzo finally spoke. Enough. All eyes turned to him. If this ritual was meant to reveal character, he said, then it has done so. Vittoria's eyes narrowed. Then you defend her? I do not defend a seat, Lorenzo replied, but neither do I fear it. I will speak with her father personally. He turned to Bianca. When he spoke again, it was almost a whisper. You and I are not pawns. But if we are to be on the same side, Bianca's reply came slowly. I'll test every cage I'm put in, she said, even yours. And with that, Lorenzo turned and left the chamber. Bianca sat down once more in the cage, alone in her half. The iron mesh still separated her from the world. But now, by nightfall, rumors devoured Florence. Bianca had escaped the ritual cage. and whispers spread from palaces to parishes. Some called it witchcraft, others claimed it was a test, and she'd bested a Medici without lifting a finger. At dawn, the church bells tolled. Not for celebration, but judgment. The Dari family sent a letter to the Medici court, sealed in black wax. Bianca, they claimed, had violated sacred protocol and dishonored the pact. Beneath their florid language, the message was clear. Remove the girl, or face the consequences. Lorenzo read it in silence. Meanwhile, Bianca stood before a church inquest. Not yet inquisitors, but close. Is it sacred because it works, or because men say it is? She wore no veil, no jewels, only calm defiant. I touched a rivet. I cast no spell, she said. You question the ritual's sanctity, a priest replied. Bianca held his gaze. Gasps. Lady Vittoria de Righi leaned to whisper. That's how witches speak. Lorenzo's advisors urged him to denounce Bianca for optics, if nothing else. But he refused. He met her in the cloister garden. You should have stayed away, she told him. I don't take orders from cages, he said. Then why do you look like a man still trapped in one? He asked if she had planned this to provoke scandal. I knew the cage wasn't just metal, she said. Perhaps, but the ritual revealed her character. Cunning, brave, unafraid. And that is precisely why I choose to marry her. You would marry a girl accused of sorcery? A Medici bride must break iron, or die trying. Later that day, in the Sala degli Uccelli, Lorenzo stood beside Bianca before the court of nobles. You say she manipulated the ritual? He said. Gasps. Outrage. Silence. Some saw a heroine, others, a danger. Lady Vittoria rose. She is not accused, Lorenzo said. She is chosen. That night, Florence split in half. In private, the cage was dismantled. Shall we store it? A servant asked. No, Bianca said. Melt it. Lorenzo raised a brow, afraid someone else might step in. She smiled. No, I just hate repeating metaphors. In Farwa, in Rome, a cardinal dipped his pen in ink and wrote, The girl from watch her. In the candlelit halls of Palazzo beneath the weighty tapestries and the dull gleam of alabaster statues, Marchesa Isabella d'Este prepared her most decadent banquet, yet it was not merely a gathering of nobles, nor a display of Mantuan wealth. To attend was to step into her web. Silk curtains veiled the walls, like sensuous mist. The air was heavy with burnt-in myrrh, nutmeg, and orange blossom. Her eyes moved like blades behind a mask of gentle amusement. She spoke little, but she listened to everything. Live peacocks strutted near the walls. Jokes turned to jabs. Toasts became confessions. Her smile glowed like a dagger in moonlight, his voice cutting the incense-heavy air. Your food is too rich, your wine's too bold, and your guests too loose of tongue. Are we your allies, or your prey? The room grew warmer, not from fire, but from fever. The toxin was working. Cardinal Savelli regaled the table with tales of a secret Vatican ledger, then reached for his goblet and smashed it against the marble. Enough. His guards moved at the doors. The mood shattered, one that recorded not sin, but the debts of kings. Condottiero Bartolomeo bragged, too loudly, of a French bride bought for a northern alliance. Let us not mistake appetite for treachery, nor caution for guilt. You have eaten well, drunk deeply, and perhaps spoken more than you intended. But I, too, have listened more than I let on, and I know the names of those who plot, and those who merely dine. And Count Giovanna Rigid, proud Giovanna he, let slip the number of men he'd stationed outside Ferrara, a detail worth 1,000 florins in silver and 100 lives in blood. No one dared challenge her openly. Their feathers dusted in gold leaf, and the food each course was a whispered spell. From the shadows of a balcony above, Isabella watched him. Her silhouette was framed in moonlight, motionless. Do you believe in Giovanni? Giovanni, a steward whose son I imprisoned for theft. She was not just a noblewoman. She was a shadow behind the throne, a mistress of whispers. And above all, you take the word of a servant over that of a marchesa. Pomegranate-glazed quail, stuffed with marrow and mint. He was trembling not with poison, but with rage. Honeyed, deer heart, in truffle foam. Tiny sugared sparrows presented on obsidian trays, all seasoned with rare aphrodisiacs imported at ruinous cost. Spanish fly, dried wolf, liver, even minute flakes of ground unicorn, horn of deception. But one, too expensive to question. A figure rose at the far end of the table. Lisandro, Isabella's steward, pale as death. He held a small vial in his trembling hand. Among the guests were Condottiero Bartolomeo, brutal and cunning, Cardinal Savelli of Ravenna, a man as pious as he was perverse, and the ever-suspicious Count, Giovanni della Scala, whose armies had skirmished dangerously close to Mantuan borders. And yet, they came, because Isabella's feasts were legend, and legends had a pull no army could resist. It was a test of domination and alchemical union of sensuality, secrecy, and strategy. Let us settle this as nobles do not with steel, but but with words, accuse me publicly. But know this, I have letters signed and sealed recording your bribes to the French, your secret meetings with Milanese spies, your illicit dealings with the Venetians. If I fall, I will not fall alone. The year was 1504, and Italy groaned under the tension of fragile alliances, ever-shifting loyalties, and papal puppetry. But here, in this carefully orchestrated theater of opulence, Isabella would play not the guest, but the grand manipulator. The invitation alone was a thing of power vellum, stamped with the golden seal of her house, carried by riders draped in crimson. To refuse was to insult. The banquet hall was transformed, yet beneath the sensual veil, a more sinister alchemy. Isabella had paid handsomely for a rare Persian compound known only as a diluted toxin that blurred judgment without clouding memory. Mixed into the final course rose, petaled wine chilled in snow from the Alps. It would loosen lips, open vaults, and expose the iron under the silk of her guests. As goblets were raised, Isabella sat at the center of the long marble table, an ivory vision framed in black velvet. Hours passed, but the banquet's climax came when Isabella herself rose and proposed a final toast. 2 pieces, and the price of truth? The room fell silent. And then Count Giovanni stood. You play a dangerous game, Marchesa, he said. A hush fell. Isabella tilted her head. Must one exclude the other? Count. He stared at her, but before violence could erupt, she drugged the wine, he said. I saw it. Gasps rippled. The game had turned. Count Giovanni pointed. Caesar. Isabella did not flinch. The guests looked between them. Doubt bloomed. Then Isabella stepped down from the dais. Slowly, gracefully. Giovanni paled. The Marchesa turned to her guests. She returned to her seat. Now, shall we have dessert? The tension remained, thick as clotting blood. But slowly, one by one, the nobles sat. No one dared draw a sword. Later that night, the guests left the palace under heavy guard. No one spoke. No one met each other's eyes. Count Giovanni, before mounting his horse, turned back once. Giovanni knew then what the others had already begun to suspect. She had not simply hosted a banquet. She had conquered them, and from that night forward, no one questioned the reach of Isabella Desnat not in Venice, not even in Rome. A queen in velvet armor. They gathered in the Vatican at dusk, beneath frescoed ceilings depicting the sins of men and the wrath of saints. Torches flickered against the golden walls, casting twisted shadows over the assembled cardinals, noblemen, and bishops each, one hand picked, each sworn to silence. What they came to witness was not written in scripture, nor spoken aloud in any court. It was a rite older than the church itself. A ceremony of consummation, legitimized not by love, but by politics. Cesare Borgia stood at the altar, his robe undone at the chest, revealing the birthmark, shaped like a dagger across his ribs rumored to be the mark of Cain. The Archbishop of Ravenna stepped forward. The pontiff himself presiding over the sacrament. He was both father and shepherd and also father by blood to the man and woman standing before him. Near the back of the hall a young noble with Sforza colors on his doublet. Still others accused Cesare himself of orchestrating the collapse. He had seen Lucretia's eyes just before she fell. They were wide open, awake. Lucretia is not capable of rebellion unless guided, calculated, to avoid consummating a union he had not wanted in the first place. Salts were fetched, even a clock shaped like a blooming rose. And if he so much as breathes her name again, I want his tongue nailed to the cathedral door. One depicted Cesare and Lucretia as Adam and Eve clothed, only in serpents, half demanded, and the other half sought Lucretia's exile. Pope Alexander, unshaken, dismissed them all with a wave of his jeweled hand, biting from a golden apple shaped like the papal tiara. Another accused the Pope of orchestrating the incestuous union to keep power within the family, calling the ceremony of Benedictio Carnalis the blessing of flesh. All subtle signals, coded in courtly tradition. Cesare knew the language well, but Lucretia remained unresponsive, her breathing shallow, her skin clammy. The ceremony was postponed. There, beneath the tapestry of Judas slaying Holofernes, he demanded names. Cesare and Lucretia, brother and sister, were to demonstrate before Rome their holy union in flesh, to sanctify their marriage in the eyes of God and, more importantly, cardinals loyal to her, envoys of the Medici, even a Spanish mistress who had been expelled from Caesar's quarters 3 weeks prior, in the eyes of rival factions who challenged Borgia dominion. Beside him was Lucretia, draped in white silk, a garland of lilies trembling upon her head. Her face was unreadable serene, perhaps drugged, or perhaps simply resigned. She had been raised for this, groomed like a falcon to fly only when summoned. The room hushed as Pope Alexander VI entered to the outer world. It was a test of legitimacy. But to those within the Vatican walls, it was theater. Ritual, a political play masked as liturgy. Yet something was wrong. As Cesare moved to take Lucretia's hand, his fingers cold, practiced, devoid of tenderness, she wavered. Her knees buckled. A soft gasp escaped her lips. Then, silence. Her body crumpled to the marble floor in a heap of silken white. A collective breath was drawn. She has fainted, Cesare said, jaw tight. A physician was called. The rumors began before the torches had even burned out. Some whispered that Lucretia had taken a tonic to appear weak. Others swore they saw her glance toward a shadowy figure. But Cesare knew better. She was faking. The next morning, Cesare summoned Girolamo, his most trusted to his private chambers within the Casto Sant'Angelo. Someone is moving against me, Cesare said. Girolamo laid out a list of suspects. But one name stood out, Giovanni Bentivoglio, a Bolognese noble with ambitions to unite the northern states. He had sent gifts to Lucretia, poems, perfumes. I want Bentivoglio watched, Cesare said. Girolamo bowed and vanished. But the damage had already begun. By the end of the week, satirical pamphlets circulated through Rome. The College of Cardinals erupted in debate. She is pure, he said, until I say otherwise. Lucretia, meanwhile, remained in her chambers. Silent, pale, untouched. Whispers said she refused to eat, that she had burned Cesar's letters, that she had buried a lock of her own hair beneath the altar of Saint Cecilia, patron of martyrs. But the truth was far stranger. Together, they practiced herbal rites, mixing crushed laurel with crushed pearls, burning incense laced with blood. These were not prayers for fertility. These were protections against seed, against memory, against men. The more they fear me, the more I am left alone. At night, Lucretia met with a nun named Sister, Violante, a former midwife, turned penitent. She thinks you bewitched her, Violante said one night, mixing wolfsbane into a small glass vial. Lucretia watched the smoke coil upward. Let them think what they wish. And it was true. Even Cesare, ever bold, no longer visited. Even France, once a Borgia ally, sent word that the scandal offended God and king alike. But solitude birthed danger. One night, a scroll was found pinned to Lucretia's door. The serpent coils, even in Eden. It bore the seal of the Dominican order. The church would still record it, but none would see it. One confessed under duress that a secret council had formed, intending to depose Pope Alexander and declare the Borgia line heretical. I want to remember the scent of truth. Another claimed that Lucretia was pregnant with the Antichrist. Cesare had them both hanged from the Ponte Sant'Angelo at dawn. Cesare responded with fury. 3 Dominican friars were seized and tortured. Still, his power slipped. Venice broke an alliance. Naples refused to send grain. She had shown herself more valuable as a symbol than a wife. And in doing so, she had ensured her place in history. The abbess died weeks later, muttering of serpents with golden eyes. Cesare turned to the one ally he still trusted, Machiavelli. Then an envoy to the Vatican. What would you do, Cesare asked, if the woman meant to unite the realm becomes its poison? Machiavelli's answer was cold. Poison, my prince, is useful so long as you are the only one who holds the antidote. To silence the rumors and restore faith, a second ceremony was planned, this time in secret. This time with no witnesses except a single scribe, a physician, and an abbess who had taken a vow of blindness. Lucretia did not protest. She simply asked for one thing. No incense, she said. On the appointed night, she and Cesare stood again before the altar. But as Cesare reached for her, he saw the faintest smile on her lips. Not defiance, not seduction. Something worse. Victory. Because Cesare knew, in that moment too, late, that she had already won. She had tainted the first ceremony with scandal. She had drawn the eyes of Europe. Whether they coupled that night, no record truly confirms. The scribe's ink bled on the page. The physician was later found drowned in the Tiber, but the record shows the words, Consummatum e. It is done. Lucretia was sent to Ferrara months later, married off to the Duke of Ust. Cesare turned his attention to war, but neither ever spoke of that night again. Some say Lucretia bore a child 9 months later, pale, golden-haired, with eyes too old for his face. Others say she took the veil and lived in a convent under an assumed name, writing love letters in invisible ink and burying them beneath rose bushes that never bloomed. As for Cesare, he died years later, gutted on a battlefield, his intestines strewn like red silk across the stones. They say his last word was Luke, but that, too, may be legend. They called her Suor Benedetta, the silent rose of Ferrara. To the public eye, she was a model of piety, graceful, with lashes like quill tips and a voice rarely heard beyond prayer. She spent her mornings tending the convent's apothecary, her afternoons among the sick, and her evenings in the chapel, head bowed beneath frescoes of Saint Sebastian. But beneath her habit, beneath the silence, pulsed a secret life, a web of letters, glances, and forbidden touch. Only a handful knew her true name. Lucretia. After the second ceremony, the Vatican had staged a marriage, shipping her to Ferrara as a duchess. But the woman who arrived at the Est court was no longer suitable for rule. Whispers followed her like perfume. The Pope's daughter, the poisoned bride, the sister-wife. Within a year, Her husband claimed she had taken ill madness. He sedaned ordered her cloistered for spiritual healing. The convent was meant as a tomb for scandal. But Lucretia did not rot. She transformed. A Dominican scholar whose reputation was soiled after he questioned the virtue of canonized saints. It began with a single letter slipped beneath the tapestry in the confessional box. It was addressed not to a priest, but to a man named Fra Angelo. The letter was unsigned, but unmistakable in tone. Fra Angelo responded in riddles, but to a woman's silhouette carved hastily into the wood, haloed with real thorns. The image bore no name, only initials. LB. Their correspondence wove a tapestry of ideas. Theology, seduction, murder, named after the virgin martyr who had her breasts cut off for rejecting a Roman consul. Lucretia's legend merged with Agatha's pain. In their whispered prayers, she was both saint and sire. Each letter smuggled out by nuns, loyal not to God, but to her. They came with offerings: hair, blood, wax dolls impaled with pins. They swore allegiance not to God's mercy, but to a woman's wrath, to be bound by linen while men in velvet decide your virtue. He wore a pilgrim's hood and carried a wooden cane carved with wolves. He asked her sewer, Benedetta, claiming he had been sent by the Pope. Have you ever known what it is to starve? Not for food, but for control. Come, confess to me, not your sins but your ambitions. A game began. His eyes went cloudy with age, the other sharp as a knife. His lips bore a scar that pulled his mouth permanently to one side, like a grin frozen in cruelty. Lucretia wrote under the name Beatrice of the Scorpions. Rome's enemies claimed he'd died, but a few whispered that he had returned to Italy in disguise. His face burned, his voice altered by injury. If you've come to poison me, she said, you're late. I've been drinking poison since I was 12. But Fra Angelo was not her only recipient. Lucretia began writing. 2 diplomats, artists. Her words, always cloaked in allegory, moved men to action. She promised favors she could no longer grant hand, yet the world behaved as if she still sat at the Vatican's right hand, because some believed she did. At night, cloaked figures arrived at the convent chapel. They knelt before the altar, not to Christ. They prayed not for salvation, but for vengeance. They called themselves the cult of Saint Agatha. They were midwives, whores, scribes, widows of soldiers, butchered in Caesar's wars. Lucretia received them behind a curtain, never showing her face. She listened, she advised, she commanded. Then came news from Rome. Cesare had escaped imprisonment in Spain, his captors dead, his guards bribed, his ship vanished in fog. One day, a stranger arrived at the convent gates. The abbess hesitated, but admitted him. Lucretia sat in the apothecary, grinding belladonna into powder. When the door creaked open, she didn't look up. The man removed his hood. His face was gaunt. Lucretia, he rasped. Cesare, she whispered. That night, the Borgia siblings sat beside the convent's fountain, beneath moonlight and stone angels. Cesare ate nothing. Lucretia handed him a flask of mandrake wine. He refused. I've returned to end it, he said. And what? You mean the story? They whisper. Lucretia laughed softly. We were born from sin, Cesare. It will outlive us both. Cesare leaned close. I don't fear myth. I fear I will remake it here. He told her of Rome's collapse. They carried no torches, no weapons, only mirrors, polished bronze discs that reflected the faces of the watchers. The Pope's health failing. Cardinals circling like wolves. A new generation of enemies rising from the ruins. Guards found only empty beds and pages, torn from him. The altar had been defaced, painted with blood to read. He wanted Lucretia to help him restore Lord to seduce key figures, to leak false letters, to become again what she had always been. A symbol too dangerous, to touch, too valuable, to destroy. But Lucretia had another plan. I will not return to Rome, she said. There were sermons preaching a gospel of feminine sovereignty, and accounts of women who faked pregnancies, sabotaged heirs, and seduced bishops into exile. Weeks later, Ferrata was struck with a spectacle no one could explain. Dozens of masked women marched silently through the streets, dressed in red robes embroidered with thorns. At the front walked a woman in white. Some claimed it was Luke. Others swore she was already dead. The Duke of Ferrara, enraged, ordered the convent, stormed. She who is devoured becomes the devourer. Bound in human skin, it bore the title, Liber Scorpii, the Book of the Scorpion. That night, a fire consumed the convent. No bodies were found. Years later, in a dusty villa near Siena, a codex was discovered hidden beneath a priest's floorboard. Within were records of the cult of St. Agathor, diagrams of poisons derived from wombs and wine, and letters signed L. At the center of it all, Lucretia. In some letters, she was a saint. In others, a demon. But always, a woman who refused to die quietly. The bells of San Giovanni echoed across the morning mist as Bishop Galazo stepped onto the marble terrace, his robes gold-threaded, his hands freshly anointed with oil and ambition. From this height, Florence lay below like a tapestry, unraveling its domes and alleys, washed pale by dawn. Its people still cloaked in sleep or sin. He breathed in incense and rain, and the firebrands of Savonarola were long buried, their ashes swept into the Arno. The Pope had written in his own hand, "Florence is to be shepherded, not ruled. You are our voice in the cradle of heresy." It was his city now. The Medici had fled once more. Galazo did not see himself as a shepherd. She walked among the nave like someone choosing a battlefield. He was more serpent than staff, and like all men who climbed too quickly, he was already haunted by a woman. He told himself God had sent her as a test, though no one had seen her write a word. She arrived with a satchel of parchment and a wolfhound with silver eyes, the second with wine and blasphemy. By the third, she leaned across the table and whispered, "Do you know the name they give me outside Florence? Claiming lineage from Naples and education in Paris. Or an assassin. Or the niece of a cardinal exiled for sodomy." No one agreed on her origin. It was too absurd. Popes had mistresses, yes, but widows. Yet when he reached for his goblet, his hand trembled. In the morning, she left behind, not a kiss, but a page torn from a banned book of passage about Lilith, Adam's first wife, who refused to lie beneath him and was cast out for daring to speak the secret names of angels. Only that her presence made men nervous and women restless. But the first time she entered the Duomo, statues wept oil in his presence. Choir boys fainted during Mass. Sometimes she brought relics a silver coin, etched with the wrong pope's face, a lock of hair tied with papal ribbon, a vial of oil said to be drawn from a corpse that never decayed. She spoke of hidden catacombs beneath the Vatican, of nuns who bore stillborn popes, of libraries where entire gospels had been chained shut with iron for fear of what they revealed. A goat was born with 2 heads in a convent orchard. Rumors spread that the bishop was possessed, that he had taken a lover who bled wine and spoke in tongues. Galazo watched from his private balcony and felt something ancient coil inside him, a flicker of fear. He had not known since childhood, when he had seen a woman hanged for witchcraft and thought she looked like his mother. Her name was She had come to Florence under the guise of a scribe. Isabella never knelt in prayer. She simply observed the choir boys, the masons, the mosaics. Within weeks, her name passed from tongue to tongue in the whispered way of curses or aphrodisiacs. She was said to be a courtesan. Galazo told himself she was a temptation, but he did not pray for strength. He invited her to dinner. She arrived wearing black velvet and a crucifix made of bone, not ivory, but real human bone, carved with tiny inscriptions of Greek and Hebrew. She spoke little, smiled less, but when she did, the bishop felt as though his tongue were a wound she had licked open. The first course passed with hymns and gossip. Galazo raised an eyebrow. "What name? La Vedova del Papa, the Pope's widow." He laughed. "Are you threatening me?" he asked. "No," she said. "I am offering myself." That night, in the bishop's chambers, she marked his back with scratches shaped like runes. From that day on, nothing was the same. Galazo dreamed in Latin he did not remember learning, but he couldn't banish her. Each week she returned. Galazo believed none of it, and yet he believed her, because he had watched her once, in the cloisters, kneel beside a dying monk and speak a phrase he could not hear. The monk, who had not opened his eyes in 5 days, began to weep, and then to sing, in perfect Greek. That night, Galazo burned every text in his personal library except the Bible, and even that he began to read differently. Then came the letter. It summoned Galazo to Rome. The Holy Father was dying. A conclave was inevitable. Florence must be secured for a specific cardinal, a Spanish favorite, whose wealth came from the flesh trade in Valencia. It was written in the papal cipher, sealed with a red wafer bearing the crossed keys of St. Peter. But Galazo had no intention of obeying. He summoned Isabella to the vestry beneath the basilica. "I want the throne," he said. She looked at him, the way a cat watches a mouse recite poetry. "I want to be pope." "You're not even a cardinal," she replied. "Not yet." She studied him. "Would you kill?" "Yes." "Would you be killed?" He hesitated. "And that was enough." "To make history? Forget your name, but remember your sins." It was the second volume of the Liber Scorpia, continuation of the heretical writings once attributed to Lucretia. This one was more dangerous. It named names. It described rituals involving clergy. It exposed lineages faked by the papal registry. She turned to go. "Then you are not ready." "Wait," he said. "What do you want from me?" Isabella paused. Before he could respond, she handed him a book bound in skin. Galazo read it in a single night. By morning, he had signed 20 death warrants. He hung 3 monks and 1 pregnant nun in the piazza. He burned 2 inquisitors for harboring forbidden texts. And then he ordered that Isabella be captured and brought to him in chains, refused communion, refused sleep, but she was already gone. The room she rented lay undisturbed, save for one object. A mirror, not made of glass, but polished obsidian. When he gazed into it, he did not see himself. He saw a cathedral filled with women wearing veils of ash. They sang a hymn he did not know. A week later, the Pope died. The conclave was swift, brutal, rigged. Galazzo's name was never mentioned. He returned to Florence in silence. Took to wearing black, he began confessing to strangers in the street. Once he was seen walking barefoot in the rain, clutching a severed lamb's head and whispering, "I am the wolf." On the day he was found, dead face down in the hands wrapped around his own throat, the choir boys swore they heard a woman's voice echo through the dome. She said only, "Benediction, let us bless the Lord." But it didn't sound like a blessing. It sounded like a farewell. Rome breathed sin like a confessional, too long sealed. In the shadow of St. Peter's dome, beneath mosaics that bled gold and saints that watched like vultures, the College of Cardinals prepared to crown a new pope. Incense thickened the halls like smoke in a brothel. Choirs sang as if to drown out the bargains being struck in candlelit corners. And behind every robe was a hand stained by coin, blood, or both. The people cheered, but the old Roman families stiffened, for they knew what he had done to his own blood to get here. His half-brother found drowned in a barrel of communion wine. His confessor sent to the east and never heard from again. His own mother locked in a convent and declared mad, bearing forged letters from a bishop who had died of syphilis before he could verify them. Her habits were her voice was soft, her Latin impeccable. By night, she copied excerpts from hidden texts into letters sealed with black ribbon. These letters traveled by pigeon, by sailor, by silence. Some went north to rebellious German convents, others west, to Lisbon's secret libraries guarded by blind monks. A few went east to Istanbul, where Jesuits drank coffee laced with poison and plotted for the return of a truer Christ. She was assigned to the Archivum's archive, where knowledge went to suffocate beneath dust and wax seals. Among them moved Cardinal Cesare, the lean one, the Milanese bastard who never smiled and never sinned where anyone could see. He silenced the Franciscans, dissolved half the nunneries in France. He asked her about scripture, but listened for lies. He quoted Augustine, but watched her hands. She responded with humility, eyes lowered, breath even, excommunicated a duke for printing Latin verse without ecclesiastical license. He forbade mirrors in convents. To betray is not sin, but sacrifice. He banned female statues in public fountains, and he reinstated the Index Librorum Prohibitorum with new editions books, so obscure that no one had even heard of them before he burned them. He had climbed the ladder not with bribes or armies, but by erasing his rivals like ink scraped from a manuscript. His name appeared in no scandals, no satire, no whispered tales among palace maids. He was, in short, invisible, and that made him terrifying. When the white smoke rose, no one was surprised. Trivulzio became Pope Innocent XIII, name he chose for irony, not humility. Innocent XIII wasted no time. One of those books, however, was not a book. It was a woman. She returned to Rome with a different name, this time as Sister Domenica, newly arrived from Palermo, but she did not suffocate. She breathed, and in breathing, she fed old embers back into flame. By day she catalogued papal bulls and ancient heresies. The new pope noticed that she had found the fourth name of God and wrote it on her skin in invisible ink. Some said she had poisoned the pope not to kill him, but to reveal him. He always noticed. When he summoned her, it was to his private chamber not to accuse, but to observe. He was certain he knew her face, but he couldn't name the memory. So he tested her, sent her to oversee the translation of the Gospel of Judas. Locked her for 7 days with nothing but the codex and a candle. When he opened the door on the 8th, she had not slept. The translation was perfect, and beside it, written in her own hand, was a note. Judas did not betray. He was chosen. The Pope dismissed her without a word. But that night, he dreamt of a man hanging from a tree butt smiling. Whispers began soon after. A nun found dead, her lips sewn shut with golden thread. A confession scrawled in menstrual blood beneath the altar of Santa Maria della Pace. Manuscript missing volume 3 of the Liber Scorpii. No one knew what it contained, only that it had disappeared on the very night Sister Domenica was last seen. The Vatican ordered a silence, but the silence only fed the myth. They said she walked now in two worlds, flesh and parchment, that her blood could unlock luck books. For Pope Innocent XIII had changed. He stopped taking Mass. He ordered the mirrors in the Apostolic Palace smashed, claiming they showed him a woman with burning eyes. He refused to sleep in the papal chambers, claiming they reeked of lilac and parchment. He confessed nightly, often weeping, but no one knew to whom. Then, without announcement, he vanished. No procession, no abdication, no death, simply gone. And in his absence, a new pope was chosen. One more pliable, more mortal. The world moved on, but the stories didn't. Some say Innocent XIII lives beneath the Vatican still, wrapped in chains of red silk, guarded by mute eunuchs who sing only in reversed Latin. Others say he fled to Cairo, living in exile among Sufi mystics, seeking a name older than Yahweh to redeem himself. As for Sister Demac, she was last seen in a woodcut printed in Amsterdam, naked but crowned, holding an apple in one hand and a papal tiara in the other. Below, the caption read, Ecclesia Novissima, the final church. The print was banned, its printers were hanged, but the plates survived, as did the idea that salvation would not come from a man nailed to a cross, but from a woman who rewrote the story. And somewhere, in the shadow of that story, the true gospel waits in red, unblessed, unburned. They called it the Flesh Gospel, though its real name was never written twice. By the time it reached the court of Isabella d'Este, Marchesa of Mantua, it had passed through too many hands to count. Some said it came from Cairo, bound in snake leather. Others claimed it was discovered in a Roman catacomb, sewn into the lining of a cardinal's robe. One version even whispered that it had been delivered by a blind girl who bled from the eyes and spoke in reversed Latin. Not about Christ or saints, or any god one could name aloud, but about the body, its hidden sacraments, the liturgy of pain and ecstasy, the alchemy of touch. The text was a fusion of scripture, anatomy, and seductia theology, not of the soul, but of flesh-made word. Isabella didn't care where it came from. Wrapped in ermine, with her fingers pressed to the pages, as if trying to read their warmth. When she reached the passage on the holy throne between the hips, she wept not from blasphemy, but recognition. She only cared what it did. Each page was a revelation. It spoke of kisses as covenant, of orgasm as proof of divine election, of the Virgin not as untouched, but as untouched by shame. She no longer asked about politics or trade. When he questioned her, she smiled as one might at a servant who had mistaken wax for gold. Isabella read it alone, by candlelight. One had been a physician's apprentice, until she was accused of practicing midwifery without sanction. Later, the women began to share dreams. Of staircases that led inside the body of saints, with mouths stitched shut, of childbirths that birthed light instead of flesh. Another was a Jewish mystic who claimed to translate dreams into perfumes. The third was a Spanish courtesan said to have memorized the entire Song of Songs and once seduced a bishop into silence. Written in a red ink no one could identify. The blood never dried. Her body did not rot. It was buried in secret, beneath the chapel floor. In the week that followed, she dismissed her confessor, banished her chaplain, and stopped attending Mass. She also summoned 3 women. Each was known to her by reputation, not loyalty. They became her council. She called them her choir of They've met in her chambers at night, surrounded by velvet and silence, and read the Flesh Gospel aloud, pausing only to debate its meanings or reenact its rites. There was no moaning, no frenzy. It was clinical, reverent. Their sessions resembled autopsies conducted on God's corpse. Isabella's husband, Francesco Gonzaga, noticed the change. He found her distant, unreadable, more luminous than ever, and completely untouched by him. She no longer played the Virgin. And then came the visions. At first, only Isabella experienced them, trances in which she whispered phrases that did not exist in Latin or Greek. The Jewish mystic was the first to die. She opened her veins, not from despair, but out of conviction. To free the spirit of language, her suicide note said. Isabella wept, then wrote a new passage into the Flesh Gospel, inscribing her friend's final words into its margins. The church could no longer ignore her. A Dominican inquisitor, Father Salviati, arrived in Mantua under papal sanction. He was known for his cruelty and for never needing to raise his voice. His approach was not fire, but cold. He froze hearts with logic, sliced souls with syllogism. He demanded to see the text. Isabella offered him wine instead. He refused. She offered him a night in her library, with only the book and a locked door. He accepted. By morning, he was gone. They found his cloak folded by the hearth, and a trail of wax footprints leading out the window, though the courtyard below showed no body, no blood, no prints in the frost. Only an open rose, blooming in midwinter. Some said he had fled. Others whispered that the book had taken him. The Pope responded with fury. He sent not a monk, but a man in velvet, Alfonso della Rovere, nephew to the Holy See, rumored to be a necromancer, disguised as a diplomat. His smile was gentle. His hands had never held a sword, but his eyes had seen too much and remembered all of it. He arrived with only one question for Isabella. Did the book choose you? Isabella herself escorted his body to the gates of Mantua, wrapped in silken prayers, bearing a note pinned to his chest. He read too slowly. She answered, "It wrote me." He stayed 3 nights. On the 4th, he disappeared. This time, there was no mystery. The Pope excommunicated her, but the excommunication did not come as thunder. It came as silence. Mass was forbidden in Mantua. Trade ceased. Priests vanished. Even beggars avoided the city gates. The bells did not ring for births or deaths. It was as if the entire duchy had been cursed into muteness. Still, they came, women from Florence and Naples, scholars from Bohemia and Cairo, a rabbi who could no longer sleep unless the book was read aloud beside him. The book passed through letters, lullabies, childbirth rituals. Its gospel spread not by violence, but by witness. Even nuns, especially nuns, arrived under false names, some still wearing the rope scars of their convent windows. They gathered not to worship, but to remember and to write. For the flesh gospel was no longer a book, it had become a movement. Only her robe remained, folded atop a statue of the Virgin now headless, with lips painted red. A network of female scribes who inked its teachings into fabric, into embroidery, into secret tattoos hidden beneath the breast or tongue, until one day it vanished. Not burned, not stolen, it simply refused to be found. And Isabella, she was last seen walking alone through the frost-covered gardens, whispering to the roses. Her body was never found. But even centuries later, whispers remain. They say the book appears when the body is denied, that it writes itself in bruises, in wet sheets, in quiet moans that cannot be confessed, that it waits, not for a reader, but a reader, and that salvation, when it comes, will not wear a crown of thorns, but a woman's open mouth. The city was Rome, and it was dying, not the slow, noble decay of marble and empire, but a more intimate kind of death, one that began behind closed doors, in whispered syllables. In the cold sweat of bishops waking from dreams they dared not confess. By the year 1531, the Vatican had grown quiet about the flesh gospel. It had become a myth, a fable told to frighten novitiates, or titillate bored cardinals during drunken feasts. The official narrative claimed Isabella d'Este died raving, that the book was destroyed, that no woman would ever hold that kind of power again. But those who understood the Church's history knew this. When Rome stops talking about a heresy, it means it has failed to destroy it. They spoke in tongues that sounded like Latin but weren't. They offered no guilt, only invitation. Some priests were never seen again. Others were found naked, faces locked in rictus smiles, with pages sewn into their stomachs. Mothers swore they had followed the rites. Midwives were hanged. Still, the children grew into something not quite holy. And now, something had returned. They noticed it first in the priests began reporting strange encounters, women entering the booth not to confess, but to proclaim. Not with fire or excommunication, but with memory. If the gospel was a text, he would replace it. If it was a whisper, he would speak louder. If it was a body, he would take it into his own. Then there were the baptisms. He was known for his beauty, his ruthless memory, and his ability to recall entire books after a single reading. Were relics the Church dared not display, censored manuscripts, forbidden icons, mummified hands of sainted whores. He spent weeks in the dark, reading by oil lamp, translating feverishly, cross-referencing nightmares with doctrine. It was said he had once seduced a queen by reading her Leviticus in reverse. Infants born in noble homes began to arrive at the basilicas with odd markings. Spiral scars behind the ears, ink beneath the fingernails. The Church called an emergency. Among the gathered was Cardinal Cesare Vitelleschi, the youngest ever elevated to the college. He had watched the flames curl around her mouth and wondered what words she had not yet spoken. He was also a survivor. Years before, as a boy, he had witnessed the burning of a woman, accused of transcribing the flesh gospel in Venetian script. He had not wept. Now, Cesare carried a sealed letter from the Pope. His mission, to eradicate the gospel once and for all. His journey began in the catacombs beneath the Basilica of St. Paul. There, buried behind false walls, and then he found it. A single page, not parchment, but skin. Not ink, but something darker, fluid that shimmered like oil and smelled of iron and lilies. The words shifted as he read them, not in content, but tone, as if the page responded to his breath, his hesitation, his hunger. It read, "She is not coming. She is already inside you." Cesare vomited, but the words stayed. He began to dream of corridors that led nowhere, filled with the echoes of weeping and laughter. He saw women dancing in circles, not in joy, but in defiance, naked but crowned, bleeding from places that did not exist. He tried fasting, then self-flagellation, then silence. But it was too late. The gospel had entered him, not as knowledge, but as infection. When he stood before the Pope to deliver his report, Cesare collapsed. His skin peeled away like wax, revealing script etched beneath the surface of his chest and thighs, whole chapters, not written but grown. The Swiss guards doused him in holy oil, but the flames would not take. Only one cardinal dared to touch him, and she died, moaning the name, Isabella. The Pope ordered his body sealed in a lead tomb. 3 days later, the tomb was empty. All that remained was a wet imprint on the stone floor, in the shape of a man, kneeling with his mouth open. Rome locked its doors. Inquisitors were unleashed, like wolves. Women were interrogated. Books were burned. Pregnant nuns were walled up alive. And yet, in the streets, a strange serenity spread. Women began to walk taller. Choirs grew sweeter. The air smelled of myrrh and salt, because it was not over. She could neither read nor write. Yet one morning, the abbot found her kneeling in the chapel, murmuring prayers that had not been spoken in any church. It was never over. The flesh gospel did not require pages. It required vessels. Each new convert was not a disciple, but a page, a new layer of the text. They memorized their roles, not like theater, but like sacrament. When one died, she was not buried. Her skin, her marrow, her memory, all rewritten into the canon. One such vessel was a girl named Lucita, an orphan raised by cloistered monks in a One carried a book with no title. One carried a knife that sang when it cut air. One carried nothing but her voice, and that was enough. He tried to silence her. She kissed him. He died smiling. His tongue turned black. A longer gaze at the wine, Lucita fled into the night. The scent of her rebellion. By the time she reached Florence, 3 women were already waiting for her in a candlelit cellar beneath the old apothecary's hall. Together, they opened the gospel once more, not in brothels, but in every gasp that is both sacred and profane, in every moan that ends in whispered amen. Their gatherings grew, but never in number, only in depth, and still, Rome remained silent, because now the church knew the only way to destroy a heresy of the flesh was to become it. So bishops began to bless beds before weddings. Nuns were given new prayers once that spoke not of denial, but of stewardship of the body. Even the Mass began to change, just slightly, a shift in tone, a pause before the word virgin. No one said the name Isabella anymore, but they remembered her posture. In the flesh gospel, it lives on, not in books. So next time you feel something stir in your chest as you kneel, or bite your lip when no one is watching, ask yourself, whose gospel are you reading, and what is it writing in you?